The 17 News at Sunrise podcast is brought to you by Clinica Sierra Vista.
Welcome back to the 17 News at Sunrise podcast, where we share your news on your schedule.
Working in the spirit of the Golden Empire, this is 17 News at Sunrise.
Good morning here at 5 a.m. Good to have you with us. I'm Maddie Jansen.
And I'm Alex Fisher.
Right now, the Grapevine is open in both directions after being closed for most of the weekend. The CHP reopened the Grapevine through Fort Tejon through Tejon Pass yesterday afternoon. CHP units were escorting drivers up and over the pass in both directions.
Highway 58, it is back open after several road closures over the weekend. According to Caltrans, the highway reopened around 10 o'clock yesterday morning from Tower Line Road east of Bakersfield to exit 172 near Mojave. Highway 178 through the canyon is also open this morning. Talked about inches of rain in Bakersfield. Some areas, though, in the northeast saw a little bit of snow. The snow started falling around midnight. The elevation there is about 835 feet.
Such a fun sight. East Bakersfield residents not only saw snow, but severe flooding in some areas. And this was the scene Saturday on Highway 178 at Alta Vista near Union Avenue. It was completely flooded underneath that overpass. Crews were busy clearing the road, and that caused some backup on the 178. We spoke to Muhammad Ali. He told 17 News he was involved in an incident in that very same spot Friday night.
Certain parts of town, it's not properly managed, I'm guessing. Last night I'm driving on the 178 and I lost control, nearly hit the wall. And now I'm going to pick up my car, which is like salvaged.
The flooding made for dangerous driving conditions for drivers until crews were able to clear the road. Ali says the flooding can be disastrous and the city is not properly prepared for these kinds of big storms. A group of protesters gathered outside the McFarland ICE compound yesterday to demand changes to what they call an inhumane environment. It comes amid a hunger strike involving dozens of people detained at the facility. 77 people detained at the Mesa Verde Processing Center and the Golden State Annex launched a hunger strike more than a week ago, protesting unpaid labor and what they called inhumane conditions. This all comes after last year's 10-month-long labor strike against the $1 a day pay rate for work done by detainees. One protester we spoke with says he's been detained in both jail and an ICE compound, and jail, he says, was much nicer.
A year and a half I spent here was worse than that. It was worse than the 7 years I spent in prison. That should say a lot in itself, right? We've had to deal with, me personally, cockroaches in our tray, spoiled milk, spoiled food, spoiled beans, high commissary prices, low wages. Like, how really voluntary is this work program, right? And they still $20 a month, $5 a week, $1 a day. The math doesn't add up.
Protesters say they've tried to meet with ICE and GEO multiple times and to have them meet performance-based national detention standards, but they claim there's been little to no response.
5:13 is your time now and making headlines around the nation this morning. NASA's SpaceX Crew 6 launch has been scrubbed in just under T-minus 2.5 minutes. The launch was scrubbed due to an issue with the ground system. The Crew 6 mission crew was set to lift off in the early morning hours from the Kennedy Space Center. The Falcon 9 rocket will take Crew Dragon Endeavour and 4 astronauts up to the International Space Station. There is still no word on when the next launch attempt will take place.
Your time now is 5:13 and making news around the world as the war in Ukraine continues. 3 U.S. officials tell NBC News that new intelligence suggests China is considering sending artillery and ammunition to help Russia. NBC's Bree Jackson is in Washington with more on how the Biden administration is responding.
As Russia's attacks enter year 2, President Biden is doubling down on support for Ukraine, his administration pledging another $2 billion in aid.
We find ourselves in a situation where the cost of walking away could be considerably higher than the cost of helping Ukraine maintain its independence.
U.S. officials raise new concerns that China is considering providing Russia with weapons and ammunition, but say Beijing has not done so yet and strongly warn against it.
If it goes down that road, it will come at real cost to China.
A lot of our partners in NATO and in Europe have been a little bit reluctant to actually pressure China in the way that we have seen in response to Russia. But if China got involved in this war, I think that would change.
As the fighting intensifies, the White House continues to rule out sending F-16 fighter jets despite bipartisan calls.
This phase is about ground combat and being able to have the tools in the hands of the Ukrainians to take the territory back that the Russians are occupying.
I know the administration says as long as it takes. I think with the right weapons, it shouldn't take so long.
And despite major losses and setbacks on the battlefield, Russian President Vladimir Putin is pushing forward.
To wear down Ukraine, to grind away, and that's what he's giving every evidence that he's determined to do right now.
As hundreds gathered in Washington, D.C. this weekend to mark 1 year of the war and call for Russia to bring it to an end. And Ukraine's President Zelensky says he wants to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to ensure that China had not supplied weapons to Russia. No word on whether that meeting will happen. In Washington, Bree Jackson, NBC News.
Although the worst of this storm is over for California, the powerful system's now on the move, threatening 11 million across the plains.
Yeah, this morning the Golden State is just beginning to see the storm's full impact, though. NBC's Dana Griffin reports.
The remnants of a massive storm that battered the region with heavy rain and historic snow.
Oh my, it's compact.
In this part of the San Bernardino County Mountains, about 2 hours from LA, several feet of unplowed snow is almost impossible for security guard Pete Rodriguez to get to work.
I'm 5'9", and the snow, it was up to my chest.
An even greater concern at the medical center where he works. He says staff are staying overnight and food and supplies are running low.
How are they able to survive inside the medical center all this time?
They've had no deliveries this past week since the storm started. So they've been relying on what they have had in. They're even saying that they're starting to run out of supplies now.
Big Bear Lake saw the snowiest 3-day stretch on record with 57 inches. Even Jackie the Eagle was hunkered down. Here she emerges from her snow-covered nest, protecting her precious egg.
A little eerie being out here and not seeing any vehicles, but that just kind of shows you the severity of the situation that we have going on right now. So we appreciate everyone's patience.
Plow crews are working 12 to 14-hour shifts to get roads back open. A new storm has since moved into the northwest, bringing blizzard conditions to the Sierra Nevada, with an additional 2 to 6 feet of snow by Tuesday.
And in your 17 Core Watch this morning, closing arguments are expected to get underway this week in retrial of the penalty phase of convicted killer David Keith Rogers' case. Rogers, now 75 years old, was convicted in 1988 of 2 counts of murder in the deaths of 2 prostitutes, Janine Benatinde and Tracy Clark. He shot them multiple times, then dumped their bodies in the Arvin Edison Canal. Rogers' death sentence was overturned in 2019, but his murder convictions stand. Jurors will decide whether he should be resentenced to death or to life without parole.
The couple charged in the deaths of their adopted sons, Orrin and Orson West, are due back in court Wednesday for a motions hearing. Prosecutors allege the boys were killed about 3 months before Trezell and Jacqueline West reported them missing in December of 2020. The boys' bodies have never been found. The Wests are charged with second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child cruelty, among other offenses. Just last week, the Wests' attorneys made a lengthy request in court for access to a full 2-hour prosecution interview with one of their own children. The 17 News at Sunrise podcast is a production of KGET and Nexstar Media Group. For more on all of the headlines in today's show, head to kget.com.